Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of the Designer's Den. I'm super excited today to have my good friend Eric Garneau on, and we're going to talk about a little zine project that Eric is doing. But, first off, thank you so much for being on the show, Eric. But second off, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit? Kind of what you do in the gaming world and all of that. So you've
Yes,
done a lot of things.
I do a lot of things. That'll probably be the organizing principle of this conversation is how much I've done. So yeah, kind of my most relevant gaming credit is that I was part of the team that founded the Chicago Board Game Cafe, RIP, opening a restaurant in February 2020. Boy, what an idea that was! But that before that, I was an operations manager at Pastimes in Niles, Illinois, which is like a big tabletop and comic store in the Midwest. I've been around games for a large part of my career. I love RPGs, both video and tabletop. Maybe one of the more interesting credits that folks watching might know is I consulted on the design of Field Notes 5e character journal and Dungeon Master or Game Master journal. I forget which term they use, but that's like one of the coolest things I think I've ever worked on, and I love those products so much. I also have a background in like podcasts, media production, show production, and yeah, I've made a couple games like tabletop games too. So here you go.
Yeah, timing issues aside on the board game cafe, I will say, for everyone who didn't get a chance to experience it in like what the short 2 weeks that it was open to the public, it was wonderful. It was great. It was, a high class experience, and it was gonna be, but the pandemic.
Yeah, just
So,
who escaped 2020 unscathed? Not I.
not I, not I. Uh, yeah, lots of changes happened in 2020, but
Hmm.
yeah, so you have done a lot of stuff. I've participated not only in the board game cafe thing a little bit, but I got to do a little bit of your podcasting thing too on your Shira podcast that you used to have, and that was the most fun.
Yes, I for years I hosted a show called Shira Progressive of Power with my friend Lauren Fates. It started out where we were rewatching the classic 1980 Shira, which Lauren had never seen, and the conceit was I was introducing it to her as like something that I loved and wondering, does this hold up to modern audiences? Which in many ways it does, in certain ways it doesn't.
Yeah.
And then we just kind of happened to be doing it while the DreamWorks show was announced, and all of a sudden we became like almost like the after show for DreamWorks where we would just go episode by episode and interview, creators and actors and all this stuff. It was really cool. Yeah, Ginny, you were on an episode. I forget. It was one
Flood
with
Arena.
oh, Flood Arena. That's right. Yeah.
Yes, Flood Arena. I wanted to do oh shoot, now I can't remember. I think it was where we introduced Double Trouble, but you had already booked some big name from the studio, and I was like,
Uh,
all right, fine, fine, fine. Um,
I
you know,
think we might have had the writer for that episode. Sorry.
no, I wasn't upset. You were like, we have someone from the show, and I'm like, okay. Uh, what's the next one? And Flood Arena though was a great episode because well, that was a great episode to be on because it was a really good episode. It was like a turning point in the show, kind of. But we digress. We are here to talk about tabletop RPGs today, and I want to first kind of get into this big project that you have going on right now. This
Yeah.
Kickstarter for Rock and Roll, a quarterly
Rock.
5e zine. So yeah, what is Rock and Roll? Well.
What isn't it? No.
For anyone who is not familiar with the Kickstarter. And I'm gonna go ahead and
Yeah. Well,
drop that link.
and it's interesting that Shira is not a total digression. So the elevator pitch is rock and roll. It's a quarterly 5e zine of one-shot adventures inspired by your favorite records. Where the your is really it's our contributors' favorite records. This really came about because I was reading this book called Playing at the World by John Peterson on the history of tabletop games in D&D. And there's this section, on Blackmoor, Blackmoor, the second like module for Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
And I just kept thinking about Richie Blackmore, Blackmore, the guitarist for Deep Purple, who then started a band called Rainbow with Ronnie James Dio. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And like Blackmore and Rainbow came out in the same year. And then I looked at the covers of the first Rainbow album and Blackmore side by side, and it's the same cover, right? And so if you've read about the history of D&D, you know that Blackmore, which was the only thing I think Gary Arneson ever produced while working for TSR, was like really fraught with production issues. And I'm like almost positive that the editor just like saw this record with the same name as his module almost and was like, I'm gonna just borrow this cover. And so there's like ingrained into D&D this history of like popular music influencing Dungeons and Dragons, and obviously vice versa. But no, there's not a lot of like primary sources on it or like even game modules for it. And at the same time, I'm like running a campaign with 2 bards in a 4-person party. So I'm thinking about music all the time. And I'm like, damn, this would be a cool like adventure thing to do, is to like overtly connect like classic works of music to, you know, tabletop adventures. And I thought I could do that with Rainbow, but I bet other people have way better ideas. So I just put an open call on the internet, and thus the project was born.
And for, you know, anyone who's not familiar with the cover of Blackmore, the Dave Arneson thing, I've got it up now. It's this, I don't know, depending on your view of it, because obviously we weren't doing like full color then, either very foreboding or very welcoming castle upon a hill. I choose to believe that like were this printed in color, it would be very colorful and rainbow, like with all the swirls in the sky. But in black and white, it's a little sinister looking. So
Yeah,
I've
and
got that up now for people to see.
if you look at the cover for Richie Blackmore's Rainbow, which was the first record the band Rainbow put out, it's the same. It's like a castle with a little mountain path going up to it. But yeah, there's a rainbow behind it, so it doesn't look quite as foreboding. But the thing is that that record came out in August 1975, and Blackmore came out in December 1975. And it's like not a stretch to think that like probably these dudes in Wisconsin and Lake Geneva were just like jamming out to, you know, Rainbow, and they were inspired by this. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I need to talk to an actual like TSR scholar for confirmation, but in my head, that's exactly how it went.
Paging Alex Cameron then. Uh, my I mean, or I guess Alan, but he's outside. Those are my sources of TSR reference. And for comparison, everybody, here's the cover of Rainbow, and it is a very colorful castle perched upon a hill. Um, yeah, the similarities are there. I definitely see them. So that gets us to, man, there's all these similarities. Why don't we, I don't know, uh, find some more similarities and write some
Right.
D&D adventures? And so you taking that rainbow theme, I think the first one here that comes up, the first example is one that you titled Catch the Rainbow. And
Yeah, that so
obviously
that is obviously based on
our text design not finalized, but look, another castle.
yeah, it turns so, you know, when you try to pay people fairly, it turns out that sometimes you resort to public domain art for your interiors, and that's where that castle comes from. But that's our secret. You
That's
know.
a, that's an industry secret. Uh, so if you're a tabletop RPG creator and you've never used public domain art, raise your hand. Let me know how you afforded all, you know, commissioned art, or, you know, all stock art that you paid for. Because I want to know the secret right there.
Right?
So you started in with the rainbow thing, and then we kind of got into some more uh current day type things. Like we got a Carly Rae Jepsen reference even in here.
Carly Faye Jepsen. As soon as I saw that email, I was like, well, this person is definitely in the book. Yeah, I mean, and that was part of why I wanted to reach out to other people. Is like I love music of all kinds. I'm a music obsessive. But I'm definitely rooted in like classic rock, and then like 2000s indie rock because of my like college radio background. But I knew that like, getting culling a diversity of perspectives would lead to more interesting and probably frankly more like commercially viable pitches.
Hmm.
And so I think Carly Rae Jepsen is an excellent example of that. Like I like Carly Rae. I'm ashamed to say know her from the episode of Comedy Bang Bang she was on, which was really good. But one of our writers, Lindsay Enet, just pitched this like incredible adventure like set in the Feywild with like a band of elves, and their singer accidentally like has a magic face sax that's too powerful and it makes everyone's emotions go crazy, and then the party has to like kind of find him and help him rein in the chaos he's wrought. And it's like really light on combat and really high on hijinks, which appeals to me because like in the campaigns I run, my players don't really like combat as much. They really just like the play aspects of it.
And I kind of like that. I've actually played something not the exact same, but like there's an instrument, and I think this was back in season 3 of D&D Adventures League, so an organized play adventure, and we're here in this elven town, and there's a concert, and like the music starts driving everyone, to insanity. You get temporary levels of madness, the mechanic in the game, and things go terribly awry. Or in this case, things get interesting because the
Yeah.
Feywild. Oh goodness, the Feywild is fun. I
Yes.
I did a segment not here. I gotta get Eric Mingay on this show so that we can talk about the Feywild for another hour because we barely touched on it in the last segment I did for a different show. Uh, so yeah, so going into the Feywild, and then we kind of change directions musically to some Mars Volta.
Yeah. So that again, all of I did strive for a variety of both like adventure styles and music genre styles in each issue, and just the way the pitches came in worked so well. So the Mars Volta adventure, written by my friend Logan Dean, who is a tabletop games publisher, he recently published a game called oh my gosh, oh right here I have it, The Company: Corporate Survival Horror. So Logan wrote this like 1 or 2 player adventure, so you can solo it or solo it with a GM, about like being lost in the dying mind, or the mind of a dying sorcerer, like inspired by the Mars Volta's, I think 2003 record Deloused in the Comatorium. And it's like super creepy and intense, just like most of Logan's writing. And it's just wildly different in tone and in play style from the anything else in the book.
And then the one after that brought me a fair amount of joy because it's based on a song by the Mountain Goats, which, if anybody
Mhm.
is not familiar with the Mountain Goats, I need to let you know they have an entire album that is Dungeons and Dragons inspired.
Yes,
So
in League with
they're
Dragons.
they're huge fans. So bringing that full circle, and now we're doing some D&D inspired by the Mountain Goats.
And that's why I said Shira wasn't, that much of a stretch, because I feel like it's pretty common now to hear about pieces of pop culture that are inspired by D&D.
Mm-hmm.
You have community episodes, Shira and the Princesses of Power. Noelle Stevenson has straight up said that like she took a lot of that show's dramatic structure from a campaign she ran. Yeah, you have the Mountain Goats album in League with Dragons, but I feel like you don't really see it go the other way a lot. For whatever reason, a lot of 5e adventures tend to be fairly guarded about their sources, I guess, or they try to kind of exist like on their own, not in this larger context. But to me, I'm like, everything exists in this conversation. Let's bring it
You
all
know,
together.
I spent this morning and yesterday evening running an interactive epic event me and my friend wrote, where we have at the very beginning a very strong Captain Janeway reference. So we're throwing pop
Yes.
culture into stuff. Uh, she as always is heavily disappointed in everyone, but nonetheless, you're gonna get it done. She believes in you. You're gonna get it done.
That's funny too, because in one of my campaigns, one of my players plays basically a satyr version of William T. Riker. And I just find in general that Star Trek story structures influence me so much more than like a Star Wars, which I feel is like a lot more of a touchstone for like adventure writers. But to me, I'm all on the like Roddenberry train. Like DS9 is
No,
one of my favorite shows of all
Star
time.
Trek has very engaging narratives, and I'm gonna took a pause here for a moment. Alan Tucker wrote an ode to Men in Black adventure called Elves in Pink. So I haven't read that, Alan, but now I have to because I haven't read anything that you've written yet that I didn't like. So I'm gonna make a note of that. But I feel like Star Trek really does lean itself to like the narrative structure of it because you've got that whole we're going out there, we've met something that's unknown. We don't have to fight it. As a matter of fact, in keeping with the United Federation, we should not fight it. But sometimes things go terribly wrong and it attacks you and you have to fight back. So, versus Star Wars, it's a space opera. That's like interconnected personal stories and like in my opinion that's a hard one to tell in an RPG setting. Like how am I going to tell you the story of how Luke and Leia kissed but it turns out they're siblings? Like that's me. I need to write a novel for that. Like I can't let the players lead that along or otherwise we'll never find out that they're actually siblings.
I mean, that's a great point, and I feel like prestige television has given us DMs such a better roadmap than films because it the way they chunk things into episodic development is really helpful, and it kind of lets you know that like you're not always gonna get to like the big twist in a narrative, and sometimes real life circumstances are gonna change how a campaign develops. I had a friend that I based an entire narrative around drop out after 3 sessions, and it's like, well, I guess everything I seeded is just doesn't matter. So let's sweep that under the rug.
Have you watched Star Trek Discovery?
Yeah, I've only seen the pilot, but
Okay,
please,
so
yeah.
you've seen enough to know about the spore drive, though. That's in the pilot. We got to get the spore drive active. So they travel via the mycelium network, and like every time I watch it and I see that, I'm like, the writers of this are definitely like RPG people. Because like
Yeah.
we set it up, we go, there's like things, we figure it out, and like they're traveling on the spore network, and every time they talk about this like otherworldly thing and we just get places, I'm like, that's the Underdark. Things happen there and we don't talk about them. But you can get places quickly.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's so true.
Or you can get lost and, get stuck in the mycelium network / Underdark, whatever. Who knows what happens down there? Especially if you eat the mushrooms you find in the Underdark. It's will you get superpowers? Will you die? Who knows?
Who knows? Only in the moment do you know.
Yeah, only in the moment. And the last one that you've got here that we didn't get into yet was the Broken Bride. So that's by
Yes.
Ludo.
Yeah.
It's inspired by Ludo, I should say. Actually by is it Zan Clark or is it Ian?
I think it's Zan, although when you only communicate with people through text, sometimes these details get dropped. But yeah, which Ludo was a band I was not at all familiar with, honestly. They're kind of this like mid 2000s like emo, like not quite college rock.
Yeah,
They might have been on like the Hot Topic circuit, but I don't mean that in a derisive way.
I'm gonna
Maybe
go with no because they're not in my repertoire from that time, which was definitely what you'd call the Hot Topic circuit.
Oh, so I don't know where they were hanging out then, but yeah, it was just the strength of the pitch, and that was one thing. Like, those things of when you submit to like any writing project, which I've definitely done this before, and then you're always like, well, if I was in charge, I would be so democratic. Like, I did ask people to send me their resumes if they thought it was relevant, but honestly, like 99% of how I chose the contributors was based purely on the pitch, and Zan's pitch was so strong, and he was just someone I really wanted to work with. So
yeah.
His story is really interesting. It's very like prosaic. It's very like mournful. It's great for like if you have like a party member who you just lost or something, which is one thing I really appreciate about like when I buy books like this is kind of their specific situation, but they plug and play into more general things your party might do. And I feel like that's something that's rock and roll has going for it.
And you can definitely take that, like, there's any number of campaigns where like you suffer that loss, whether it's a party member or like a beloved NPC, and like then like what do you do? Like if you're not a DM who's used to dealing with that situation, like, and you don't know how to address it, but you want to in your game, you can take this little section, you can read it, you can tweak it, adapt it to your campaign, and drop it in there.
Right.
And yeah, I think it's good that we're touching on a couple of like a little heavier topic there, in addition to the definitely lighthearted Carly Faye Jepsen.
Yeah, and that's something I really like, and I hope we can maintain with every issue is the you can go on a huge journey of feelings. You know, there's a murder mystery, there's like a psychological horror, there's like a raucous party in the Feywild, there's a funeral dirge, and then the rainbow one, to me, that was like the most genre I've ever gotten in my writing. Of like, I just tried to imagine a Ford Aerostar van in 1978 and then think of the art on the side of the van, and that's what I like wrote to. So like, you know, and I did take cues from Blackmore in as much as like, you know, I don't think I'm violating the OGL, but like there's Sahwagin in the in my adventure, much as there are in Blackmore. There's like an abandoned temple, so it's kind of sort of like of the same cloth without being like copyright infringy, I hope.
I haven't read it yet, but I'm sure that you're stickler enough for like having read the OGL that you're good, and you can definitely have your Sahagin in there. Like I've plenty of third party things that have them in there, so it's just like it's
Yeah.
coincidence.
Yeah, right, exactly. Oh, and I just want to clarify in case anyone is like watching and taking notes. I don't in any way think that like Blackmore was inspired by the band in totality, because you know Arneson was running a campaign called Blackmore in 1972, which like maybe he took the name from Deep Purple's guitar player, but that seems like a big stretch. I just think the covers are too
Yeah, so
coincidental.
the
So
art
I did want to asterisk that.
the art director maybe had some
Yes,
inspiration at the very least.
yes,
What Dave Arneson was doing, who knows where he got it from? Pulled it all out of his head.
exactly.
You keep mixing Gary and Dave together, by the
I
way.
do. Well, are they? Yeah, in my head they're one person, but I know that's
Oh,
not true.
oh,
No.
you want to get into some drama?
Oh no, I sure don't. I sure don't.
They are distinctly different people, and people have feelings on that matter. As far as like what they actually contributed to the beginnings of D&D, each and independently, like
Yeah.
obviously, each person's family disagrees vehemently with what the other person's family says.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And I truly don't want to take a stand on that. You know, and
we have
I let
I've got no dog.
I,
I got no dog in the fight. You got no dog in the fight. We're just playing. Like, I'm just happy that whoever contributed what they did, and it came to what
exactly.
it is today. So whoever did it, good job, great work, A plus
Yeah.
plus.
I'm talking purely about the editor, the poor harried editor in 1975 being like, we have to get this book out by the end of the year. What do I do? But you know, I'm sure someone's written extensively about that as well. So
Probably. There's actually oh goodness, there's a oh now it's gonna drive me crazy. I have to look it up. D&D. Um, it's a D&D artwork documentary. It's called Eye of the Beholder. And
ooh,
if you want to learn some more about the histories and stories behind some of the art that helped, create some of the, I guess, word, um, classic, artwork that, people associate with stuff. You'll see that old, like the book covers, the Dragonlance artwork, and all of that stuff in here. And there's a lot of information on, like, what the in-house artists did and where they came up with some of their inspiration and all of that. And it's really interesting, and it's on Amazon.
that's awesome.
I wish I had
Good.
like an Amazon affiliate link for that right now, because I'm like, that was an ad, except I don't get paid. So, it was not. But yeah, so aside from taking a lot of inspiration from music, what else like drives your design philosophy? Because you're gonna make more things, and this isn't the first thing that you've made. You've written adventures that may not have seen the light of day. Um, but you've written stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I kind of I look at them as like, I mean, obviously compiling an anthology versus like writing for your friends group are fairly different, but they are kind of two sides of the same coin. And I'll tackle the anthology issue first because I've never published anything in the world of D&D before.
Yeah, and that's where
5e,
everybody's.
if we're being
That's where everybody
technical.
starts. I've done some
Right.
things, but publishing.
But it, to me, curating this zine reminded me of like when I would host storytelling shows, which is something I did for like 8 years through a podcast called Your Stories in Chicago, and then I was one of the producers of Mortified in Chicago for a couple of years as well. And so it's really the same process of like, you look at what people have to bring to the table, like the perspectives
Mm-hmm.
of like, you know, what is their story, what perspective of theirs has like informed this story, because even in something like tabletop games, right, there's always like a nugget of honesty in,
Oh,
I think,
very much.
in adventures,
Very
right?
much. Like I feel that like obviously everybody has their things that they like to write, but I feel that like when you're reading something that someone wrote, you could see a lot of their personality shining through. Um, like um, I've gotten told, and these seem kind of at odds with one another, that I write a lot of happy fluffy stuff, and then also that I try to kill players and that I'm very tough. And I'm like, those seem at odds with one another, but they're not really.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, I feel similarly like torn in different directions sometimes, but yeah. um what where were we just, oh my gosh, I just got lost in a train of thought here.
Yeah, your general like design philosophy, what drives it?
Yeah. So okay, yeah. So honesty in
Yes.
these games, right? So like for instance, in the Carly Faye Jepsen piece, when that was pitched to me, the writer Lindsay wrote something like, you know, this piece reminds me of like a summer of like festivals and celebrations, and it reminds me of the summer I met my wife, and it was the summer of Call Me Maybe.
Oh,
And I just thought that was like so cool, and you can tell that in her writing, like she feels, you know, the emotions behind this world building. So I would say like, you know, it's really important to have that honesty, and I felt that from all of the adventures that ended up making it in, even if, you know, it's not necessarily apparent how like something based on Deloused in the Comatorium is honest to Logan. Like you can tell that it is, you know.
you could just like feel I guess they feel very genuine, not like they're trying to push a story.
Yes, genuine, exactly right. And so I would say that that is also the kernel by which I write adventures from like my friends groups, but I try to do it from the other way of like I mentioned prestige television. I try to look at like their characters and who they are as people,
Mm-hmm.
and like what kind of stories I like to tell, and then and make something organic. Like even if I'm taking like honestly, compiling a zine means now I have all these adventures I can use and test on my friends before they get published. But editing those and finding like, how is this true to your character, and like what about this is emotionally true. You know, some at
That's
the Chicago Board Game Cafe, we were working on this, me and Lucas and Ned, who are my co-editors. We had spent a while working on this like mm mmottt RPG world. So it would have been like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy 14, except they were tabletop adventures you could only play at the cafe.
yeah. I
And we
read
just,
some of them. I'd say
yes.
I think I read 4 of them, so I don't know if that was all.
Yes, yeah, there were exactly right, and we never got to debut it, but that idea really stuck with me of like, yeah, just like how to make a really compelling interactive world, and so I've like tried to channel that into
Mm-hmm.
my personal adventures as well. Yeah.
And I'm going back through the memory banks, but I recall like really liking those. I was super excited because I was gonna run one. I was gonna do it
Hmm.
in these really
Hmm.
cool rooms that you had set up. But they all had this kind of really immersive feel to them. Like there was a lot of narrative and a lot of story to really dive into to make players feel like they had a connection with whatever the scenario was that had been set up. Each of them was pretty unique. And so I think that you've always done a pretty good job like establishing like the voice of the author.
And you know, I think why I got on that tangent is one of the rules we had in like story editing those was like never do a one-to-one correspondence with like real world politics, not to shy away from them, but because it breaks that immersion. But in my own writing, I try to find ways to like bring real world issues, like translate them through the realm of fantasy enough so that like the players who I all know like their personal politics, and I know the things they care about and are passionate about, that they have some investment, so like in my campaigns, one of the ones I run is like it's in the world of Theros, and it's set in like a suburb of Akros, because I think this idea of like suburban life is really interesting. Like suburbs are these little like tax havens for like upper middle class people who get to leech all the benefits of a city culturally, but they don't pay in any of their money to the city. And so it's like, well, what does that mean in a fantasy world? Some people might think that's heavy-handed, but to me, that's so fascinating. So
No,
I've really enjoyed like dissecting that.
it does though, because like they live near Akros, and like they're between Akros and like the the lands where wild creatures roam and monstrosities. So like they're gonna be like that first line that gets attacked if there's like a huge invasion. And what are they gonna do? They're gonna be like, Akros, send us your army. Do they pay
Right.
taxes for Akros army? No. No, they do
Exactly.
not.
So they get to, yeah, exactly right. And I mean, metaphorically, that's how I feel about like a Naperville. Like no offense to any Naper villains out there, but like, what do you do to make Chicago better? You just drive into the city on the weekends and enjoy all the culture.
My
Although downtown Naperville is kind of sweet, so.
my feeling on the Chicago suburbs is that they pretty much don't exist for me, because I have to get in a vehicle and drive to them, and I don't have
Mm.
one of those. So like, people tell me like, "Oh yeah, I'm coming to Chicago," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, where are you gonna be?" And they're like, "Schaumburg," and I'm like, "You're not coming to Chicago."
That is one way that like I find LA to be very different, because so I recently moved to LA and everyone has a car out here, so like it just everyone kind of knows the whole region. But I'll meet people from Chicago out here and I'll say like, oh yeah, where are you from? Oh, Lake Villa. That's not Chicago, dude. Like I lived in Logan Square. That's Chicago. But anyway.
Yeah, Logan Square represent.
Yeah.
We're in the city. We pay city taxes.
Right, exactly. It's expensive as hell to live in the city. But and that's my thing, is like everyone I play with lives in the city, and I think we all kind of feel these similar like cultural ways about like the suburb city relationship, and I just find that really interesting. So again, it's not like a one-to-one, like, I would never put like an analog of like a former president in my campaign, because that's corny and it's not fun. But to look at these issues that do exist in other contexts, I think is really fun.
And I think like it's very important to think too. Like a lot of people think of the Forgotten Realms, and when you think of the various regions, they're kind of analogous to real world regions. But even Ed Greenwood stresses the importance of like it's not exactly that. Like don't go into these preconceived notions that um you know um like trying to think of a place now, and all of a sudden I'm like Termish. It's not it's not like Turkey. It's its own place. It has its own customs and civilizations. The people just kind of you know look like the Turkish.
Right.
And same with like Tamir and all of that, and Chult. The people in Chult, they are not Africans, and also Africa is not a monolithic culture. Everybody.
And that's some way that's a way that like Star Trek kind of fails us, is like it kind of has that problem of every alien race is an analog for like a different real world culture. And
Also,
that
every
that
alien race is really just a human with prosthetics, and that drives me crazy.
Well, but in Next Gen, they even do an episode where they explain why that is, which is almost like brilliant in a way of just like hanging a hat on your own limitations and making it a narrative hook. But it is also fairly cheap. Yes.
All the M-class planets happen to have bipedal people. Their average height between like 4.5 to 6.5 feet tall. And you know, it's just weird that it works out like that, right?
Yeah. But no,
Sometimes they have gills, sometimes they have whatever, but pretty much human shaped.
but
Yeah.
yeah, you're totally right. And I think, that I know you've weighed in on this on social media, like, that's kind of a growing pain that D&D is going through now. Like,
Hmm.
at its outset, it did kind of have these like rigid ideas of like racial morality, which is like not really cool anymore. And I'm glad that Wizards is breaking from it. And I know not all players want to, but for me, there's just no room for that. Like, when I do character creation with my players, I remove gender binaries, first of all. That just seems like obvious. And I try to use the ancestry and culture rules that someone published on drive through instead of race, because I just don't like that like your race would give you you
I
know
got a couple of things that you would like if you like the ancestry and culture. So I'm gonna go ahead and shout out the people who created these that I love. So you're gonna like an elfin orc had a little baby in the recently funded Kickstarter, Those Who Wander, because it really expands upon that lineages and backgrounds thing, parentages. Like, some things, of course, like are biologically driven. Like you can be raised by Tritons all you want, but if you're not biologically Triton, you're gonna have a hard time breathing underwater. Okay.
yeah, right, wings or hooves, things like
Right.
that, yeah.
But then everything else, it's like nurture versus nature, and so yeah, thanks, Joe. So kudos to Adam and VJ Harris. Adam's last name I obviously just blanked on, so my apologies. But they did an awesome job with Elfinor had a little baby, and then expanded upon that even more with a bigger team for Those Who Wander. And I think like people going and doing stuff like that, projects like that, where we're getting away from the all drow are evil. Well, first off, we know that's not true because there's a whole fucking novel series about Dritz. And if everyone can handle that Dritz isn't evil, then you already know that you
Yeah,
could just like stop. You're just being a little bit racist. And then the people who are like, "Well, you're the world bringing real world races into D&D," and I'm like, "But are we?
yeah, it's like
But
kind of
but are
there.
but are we?"
I guess that's where like my real world politics come in. Although I guess I reject that it is political, because to me it's just like being a good human.
I
Not I don't
I
want to be
I
crappy about it, but
I also don't think that like alignment and race going together, and the talk about like how uh orcs for instance have always been heavily black coded, and also heavily presented as evil creatures who are generally somewhat dumb. Like I don't think that that's racism or political to be like, hey, they don't have to be.
right. And also, doesn't it lead to worse games? Like, to me, like a game at its essence is making someone make choices.
Yeah,
And
you gotta have that
to me
moral
that
ambiguity. And if you go into it with, oh,
yeah,
I've seen a goblin and I just know because it is a goblin that like it's an evil bad guy, like you have no choices. You have no morality. You have no no quandaries there really. You're just like, there was an evil thing and I killed it, and yeah, that was the whole story.
right. And sometimes players need that easy win, right? Like after like a moral defeat, sometimes I'll do like I actually picked this trick up from Brian Michael Bendis when he wrote Ultimate Spider-Man. He would say that like, Peter usually ends his arcs getting pretty beat up, so I like to have him start his arcs getting an easy win. So sometimes you'll throw in like an easy win, like a dream monster or something, is something I give to my players. But yeah, ultimately like moral ambiguity is one of my favorite things to put players through. My friend Grayson, when I started DMing, gave me this advice. Only put your players in situations where you're really excited to see what they do, and that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like my driving principle for anything I write.
And if you still have players who are like gung ho to find that obviously evil and defeat it, like there's tons of ways to go out there and to code your villains as like, yo, this person's like super evil. Okay, why do we
Yeah.
know that? Is it because of their race? No, it's it,
Right.
it's because they're capturing people from their village, taking them from their family, and forcing them into slavery.
Yeah.
That's how we know they're evil. So can we kill them? Yeah, yeah, yeah. We can. We can
But then
try.
so
We can try to reason with them first to see if, like, hey, do you mind like not doing the slavery thing? But
Yeah, that's a loaded word, right? But then for me, some of the fun comes in, and you see it in rock and roll, but definitely in my private campaigns of like using tropes of like role playing games, but kind
Hmm.
of twisting them so that like one of my favorite things to do is a call to adventure from like a questionable character where you shouldn't probably accept the call at face value. And usually my players are very good about figuring out like, wait a minute, this guy doesn't seem quite on the level. But like recently I did that with a group, and like kind of the like straightforward adventure is just like, yep, all right, we're gonna do this like quest. And I'm like, really? You're not gonna like ask questions about why? Okay. And it was
I
really
mean, like,
interesting.
you get offered the deal of a lifetime by a Red Wizard of Thay, and you're just like, well, it pays well.
Right. Sounds fun. Oh, okay, cool. Well,
But
maybe you'll have some.
you need to stop. Maybe do a little history check to see what your character knows about Thay and consider, like, should I ask for more detail?
Right. Or
What?
like accept that there's going to be ramifications when you come back, and then it's fun playing with that too.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, you can go and you can do it, but once people find out you did it, they're like, "Oh, you're an ally of Thay." So like, I feel a certain way about you now. Not to say again, not all fans are bad guys, but in general, they have very questionable practices, and uh, in the game world nowadays, we're beginning to see like even within their culture, there's this split on we used to do everything this way, but now like we're wondering like why. Why? Have we
yeah.
considered like maintaining our dominance in society like through a different method? And like that's a really like provocative storyline because you're like, okay, they've always been great and respected and feared because they did these things, but now people are like, yeah, but they've been doing that forever and like it's not really that scary anymore.
Right. And I mean, you're totally right. Like asking those questions, why is it this way? Like not only it's good narrative, but it also plays in with like the history, like all this established history. It uses it as a weight. Call back to Star Trek one more time. Uh the first J.J. Abrams Star Trek movie, I think, is so effective because it uses everything we knew as like the springboard for this new universe. Like that's how I look at D&D Reckoning with some of these changes now is like, anything that exists in like this cultural environment where players change it, it is in this constant conversation. And I think it's so weird that people are resisting that conversation because ultimately, like, what is Dungeons and Dragons if not something that's been built by committee?
Uh and we've established new committee members now.
Right. Built, I should say, built by committee to follow like the most compelling and to
Mhm.
reward the most compelling narrative choices. And
Right.
to me, that's what is happening now. And we're in this great age where, dummies like me can add their voices in some small way to the D&D world.
And there are enough people out there doing content creation that like if somebody makes something to where like they've got this moral path they're following that you really don't like, there are enough options out there that you can just be like, I won't buy that one.
Yeah.
And like it's you don't need to fuss. You don't need to put up a scene and be like they're creating things that I don't like and this is wrong and why would they do that? How dare you? When you can literally like just ignore it and buy one of the other 100 things that suits your style. Because there are literally hundreds of D&D products being created every single day.
Yeah. I agree. Like no one's taking away, the game that like these people like the classic game these people love. It's just changing in many places, but there's always, I know, like dungeon crawl classics. If you just want to kill dragons, like this is a perfectly great way to just like raid a dungeon and kill dragons.
Oh god, Dungeon Crawl Classic can be brutal. But like if you still want to play, first edition original D&D or AD&D and
Yeah.
use the rules and the mindset and everything that they had when they did that, like cool, get your group that also wants to do that and do it.
Yeah.
Um yeah, so obviously a lot of cultural stuff drives your design philosophy and I
Yes.
and I am absolutely shocked to find this out. No, not. Um but outside of that, like do you have like any influences from like the inside the industry that really kind of drive your stuff, the look, the kind of product that you make? Obviously, right now we're going with a zine, but you've got future
Yeah.
plans.
Yeah, well, so I'm fairly fresh to the tabletop industry. So a lot of my influences are kind of adjacent. I will say, like, Will Hindmarch is one of my kind of gurus. I, am always lucky when I can email Will and ask for input or advice, and he always very graciously gives it. I love Will. My co-editors on this project, Lucas Cousins Hall and Ned Parker. Ned's on a podcast, Dungeons, Dice, and Everything Nice. Lucas was on a podcast, I believe, Dungeon Rats, and is active on Twitch as well. These guys are great. I wouldn't have done this project without them, and they've really helped me, kind of take a narrative vision and translate it to a 5e like format that works. But I would say, like, story wise or like narrative wise, my biggest influence is Grant Morrison, who's a comic book author. So, kind of adjacent to D&D, and his kind of storytelling philosophy that sticks with me. There's 2 points. It's like, one is always, which this is cultural, always be an anthropologist, not a missionary. In other words, like, don't impose your values from the top down. Let values grow from organically from the bottom up.
Yes.
And then two is never save ideas. If you have a good idea, put it out immediately, and then you're forcing yourself to think of an even better idea next time. Now, that doesn't always work for Grant. He wrote Final Crisis, which some of you might be thinking, like, the last issue of Final Crisis is pretty impossible to read. I happen to agree with you, but that doesn't mean he doesn't try. And I really appreciate that spirit.
Yeah. Sometimes, sometimes, execution doesn't go. You got it in here, and you get it out. You're like, this didn't work as well.
Yeah. But then, as far as like in the industry, so my biggest inspiration, it comes from reading that book, Playing at the World, by John Peterson. But then, as far as like in the industry, I can't like thank John in that book enough. And just reading about how the early days of like D&D and like tabletop fandom grew out of this like zine industry, I think is so fascinating, because in the days before like message boards, and internet, or even necessarily like reliable phone lines, like certainly no fax machines and stuff, like people would just mail zines to each other and collaborate on this. And I just think that's so cool. I was kind of a part of a scene in Chicago where zine making was a thing, more for comics than games, but I just thought this is a great delivery method for this, and it is cost effective, and it means I don't have to sink a ton of money into a project that might not pay out.
Yeah. And like, I think that is a very good point. That you've got a lot of moving parts going on, including like consideration on, like, cost, and other people's cultural values that you want to bring in on any project you're working on, and just like your general inspirations. And like, a lot of tabletop RPG design nowadays is especially like collaborative projects. That's really what moves the industry forward. And there's just so much out there to draw from now, because the game's been going since, what was it, 1974?
Yeah.
Plus or minus a few years, because I'm always getting it off somehow. I think I got it right this time.
I think so.
But, you know, and like, the great thing about tabletop RPGs is, like, there's not really a wrong way to do it. Like, that's, if anybody wants like a secret, that's an industry secret, like you're creating and you're like, I'm doing it wrong. That's not a thing. You might be getting the mechanics as they currently exist wrong, in which case that's a whole separate issue. But there's no way to get like the game itself wrong, the narrative, like, because your story is your story. And I think you're doing a, like, with your Kickstarter or your zine, you're doing a great job presenting other people's story. And I'm excited to see like what you do next, honestly.
Yeah, me too. I mean, the Kickstarter funded successfully, so there's at least a year of this, but I could keep it going forever, just because I think, when I hosted the storytelling show, I used to have a saying, everyone has one story, right? I think every album has a module out there. and I want to reach so many. And this is like a very Eric project, because as much as I love music, I've very rarely been able to incorporate it into something I've done professionally until now. So I could keep this going for years, and I hope that submissions and money allow me to do that. I don't really know what's next. I mean, you know, maybe there's a world where maybe like I moved out to Los Angeles to try to open a cafe out here, and it's just a matter of like biding my time and finances. So like maybe another physical location with my own proprietary publishing is in the works, but who can say?
Yeah. You know, I don't think you'd call it the Eric Garneau Publishing Company. You'd come up with a better name.
Uh, Tabletop LLC. It is already registered.
That's really bland and generic. I'm just gonna be honest.
Well, when you think about it, like maybe the reason why it's called Tabletop and what business it was for, it makes more sense.
Yes, no, but it was more than just tabletop RPGs. It was games. It was everything. Anything that you could do with your friends sitting around a table. It was that community.
Including eating, maybe. Yeah. Maybe
Uh,
I formed this LLC last year and then just happened to have it sitting around.
I mean, definitely including eating, because an integral part of any good community experience is, of course, food. Food brings a lot to the party. Um,
Yeah,
and you know, uh, as all D&D groups know, someone's in charge of bringing snacks. Like
always.
always. Whether that be, you know, an actual person or dominoes, somebody's bringing snacks. But yeah, so you know, going forward, you're gonna do more of this. You're gonna do more other things. You're gonna, you know, find something other than music to base your stuff on, because it's just gonna grow. But like, if you could do anything, any project, work with anybody, you got the money, you got the time, you got the, what's your dream project, Eric?
I mean, really, honestly, right now it is rock and roll, but it is working with some of the people like who inspired me professionally. Like if I could get something from Kieran Gillen, who's this comic book writer who wrote a bunch of series on music, and RPG. So he wrote Phonogram, he wrote Die, Wicked and Divine. Young Avengers has nothing to do with music or RPGs, but it's really good. I would love a rock and roll book that Kieran Gillen contributed to. And he actually did back the product on Kickstarter, not to like tell tales out of school, but so
It's
he knows it exists.
exciting.
I just
Yeah.
need to have the money to pay Kieran,
Yes,
um,
yes, because we pay our creators and we pay them fairly.
right. And I have already paid all of our contributors. I paid them what seemed to be a pretty industry standard rate plus commission. That said, someone who writes for DC and Marvel Comics probably works for higher than industry standards. So, probably out of my budget for now.
Well, that and let me be honest, tabletop RPG standards for pay have been abysmally low. They're rising now with like all of the third party publishers coming in. They're like, we want the good talent, and as everyone in the world can tell you right now, if you want good employees, you pay them.
Hmm.
Uh, Talking to you, Sonic and Albuquerque. You know what you did. Um, I posted an article just a little bit ago on my Facebook and Twitter. It was a very good, much more well reasoned rant against our current economy and the whole model. So I'm gonna get off my soapbox right now. But yeah, so uh, you know, someday in the future, you'll be raking in the dough from your zine. You'll pay yourself. Uh,
Yeah.
and then you'll have enough money to hire Kieran. Uh, this was a topic we were touching on in the pre-show, uh, and you know, not to take your spotlight for a second, but I do want to circle around to like how annoying I find it that in the tabletop RPG community right now, a lot of people measure their success on a Kickstarter as breaking even, paying all your contributors and everything, but the creator literally doesn't make a cent. All of the time they put into their writing, their, you know, project management, their logistics, their marketing, their whatever is unpaid, and like, budget that into your Kickstarter, okay, everybody? Okay. That's my free advice for the day.
I mean, and I agree with you, and I'm guilty of that absolutely myself. The thing is, like for me, it's like this first step is finding out, is this viable? Like, do enough people want a niche of a product? And like, I mean, yeah, it looks like we're gonna land at the exact break even point, which is kind of amazing, and it means that I will see no money from this. Minus, as I was telling Ginny, the money that you make from like the nebulous U.S. tax laws when you have a company credit card and like what becomes a write-off, etc. Um, if the IRS is watching, forget I said that.
No,
But yeah,
I
I mean,
mean,
the other
America tax law, that does work out, and it's perfectly legitimate and valid. Consult your accountant. We're not an accountant.
right. But the thing is too, like a Kickstarter is essentially a pre-order, right? So now if I do break even, that basically means that all of the money that I make going forward, minus royalties and minus, frankly, the pretty small amount of like a cost of printing a book, which is not that much, is profit. And then that goes to, so not only do the writers get royalties, but my co-editors do as well. But then also I'll get some money, and that's good. I would like some money. I have a job. I would rather make money off of something I'm super passionate about, but wouldn't we all?
Yeah, I mean, that's the dream. Um, God, and that's really that's a great place. We are at the end of our hour. On that note though, Eric, um, do you have like anything ongoing that you want to plug here other than your Kickstarter, which we'll plug it again anyway, how amazing it is. And then where can everybody find you on social media or contact you if they want to get in on the next zine?
Yeah, so my the Kickstarter is the big thing. I kind of COVID killed all my projects. I just didn't feel like doing anything for months, but then this struck me like a bolt of lightning. So, back that. You can find me on the internet. So Twitter, I'm at Eric C. Garneau. That's ERICCGARNEAU.
Yeah, spell it
I'm
right.
also Yeah, that's right. I'm also on Instagram if you care. Although I don't at the moment I don't even remember what my Instagram handle is. I think it might also be Eric C. Garneau. So that's that. And yeah, I mean the Kickstarter is the big thing. Oh, if you want to submit, which I would love, just send me an elevator pitch to DND at tabletopla.com.
Nice, nice. All right. And I'll get that email address in the show notes, which, if everyone hasn't noticed, I've stopped putting the guest info down below in the panels. It was becoming rather unwieldy because, lo and behold, there are too many talented people to be contained in one column. So it's moved over to my website where I have a clickable PDF, which you can get to by clicking the thing that says guest info in the panel. So I'll put that in the notes there for Eric. And I just want to thank you again so much for being on the show. Look forward to seeing this project fun, seeing you get more involved in the tabletop RPG hobby, so that we have even more things to talk about and bond about, and just you're part of the family now.
Yes, thank you so much, Jenny. This was great. No one's really asked me this much about like my design process before, so it's really nice to be able to talk about it. And
Yeah.
thanks everyone for listening. Go back that stuff.
And yeah, no, it was great to. I think this is the first person where we've gone with musical influences. So, uh, you know,
Oh,
uh,
I didn't even mention Bruce Springsteen. Bruce Springsteen. Bruce Springsteen. Okay, it's done.
yes, I mean, everybody's influenced by something by Bruce, right?
Yeah.
But yeah. So as always, everybody, you can find me on the social media by looking up my name on all things. Oh yeah, free social media tip for Eric and everyone else involved. If you don't want to have to remember all of your social media, get a link tree, and in the bio on each of yours, just put that same link tree. Interconnect your online personality, also known as your brand, Eric.
Mm. I
Oh,
don't have a brand. I'm a person.
you
That's
do.
what I'm
Your
like.
brand is Tabletop LLC.
Ah, damn it. That's true.
Can't get out of that one. Yeah, so you can catch me here every Sunday, 4 p.m. Central Time. I got a pretty good guest lineup coming up. So this is the last one for April. So in May, next week, we've got Alan Tucker, who's a regular here in chat. So excited to hear how about Alan's process and hopefully about how he's paying himself from his Kickstarters. Then we're going to talk to Allison Wang, Sadie Lowry, Josh Simmons, Steve Penkatai, Kat Evans, Latia Jaquise, and Steven Garcia. And then scheduling some more people out through July. Apparently, I can't schedule people like 4 months out. They don't know what their life is going to be like then. I know, right? So excited to be that. And I will be back tonight in a couple hours with the Baldman HQ segment. So if you want to catch up on the virtual weekends, all the goings on, and the exciting events that we're going to be hosting for the May event, which is in 14 days, no, 12 days. Weeks are hard. So that starts on May 9th through 11th. So tune in tonight. And then tomorrow night, we're having the first, I was about to say inaugural, that would be once a year, the first episode of the new monthly Herald Skills show, where we're going to be giving tips on DMing and running a game generally, being a good player, being a good part of the community. And, I mean, honestly, you know, much like all of my shows, we're going to be hanging out and talking. So join me there. But that's going to be it for this episode of the Designer's Den. So I guess until later tonight, everybody. Bye.
Bye.